Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Max Frequency Podcast. I'm your host, Max Roberts, and joining me this time is app developer, sideloader, Riley Testut. Hello, Riley.
Hey, Max. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to talk about all this.
Thank you for agreeing to come talk to me. I reached out, I think, in December. I had thought about it. I saw this Twitter thread. You're like, if anyone wants to talk, shoot me an email. And then after the holidays, you've caught up with your email, and we made it happen. Yep. So thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today.
Of course, yeah. A good way to start the year. Just like get back in the swing of things. Just start talking about side loading everything.
It feels like the year to be talking about it. It's going to be on everyone's mind. And honestly, the way I wanted to kick off here, I think diving into side loading, was I wanted to ask you, what did it feel like to see your name on Daring Fireball when Gruber wrote up about it?
That was like extremely just like surreal, because I've been following the Apple community, the Apple sphere, since like I got my first iPhone back in like 2008. And of course, Daring Fireball was like always the go-to blog. And he'd have inside information or just have great insights. And so, when I was just reading the article he wrote about alternate app stores, then he like references me on my Twitter thread. It was truly just like oh wow, like little me, teenager Riley who just started this journey. I was like, oh, that's really awesome. Yeah. That I was able to like say something worthwhile in the first place.
When I was reading his blog post about it, because again, when Gruber writes, especially when he writes original pieces, you're in there, you're reading it. And when I saw he called out your Twitter thread, which I had read previously, I was like, that's awesome. It's so cool to see it. I mean, he says Testut wrote a concise Twitter thread. I feel like that is such a compliment from Gruber.
It really was. Like I was just so happy with it. Exactly what I wanted. Like his piece about all this stuff, to then just throw in the fact that, hey, also Riley, who's like been doing this stuff, has some thoughts. And I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted to happen with all this. And so, I just extremely happy with it.
Yeah, I thought that would feel pretty awesome for you. The Twitter thread in question, it came up afterward from, I think Gurman had written a piece that day or weekend or something. It was basically saying the EU is going to force Apple to allow side loading either stores or just loading apps to the side. And you, as the developer of altStore, safest feels weird, not quite right, but you have the most official way to load apps onto your phone without jailbreaking. Right. It's semi-blessed by Apple because you're using the tools they've provided.
Exactly. Like I'm not trying to break their stuff. I'm just using their stuff in a way they probably didn't foresee happening, but it works.
It does work. So, you go through this thread, and I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the gist essentially is you would prefer just plain old traditional side loading rather than letting competitors just open a ton of stores and then fill those stores with exclusive apps using money to leverage that.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it, which is hard to express in nuanced terms on Twitter, but that was pretty much the underlying point.
I agree with that, first of all. I think the idea of stores segmenting the platform so aggressively, especially when you would have companies like Meta and Epic throwing millions of dollars in and just totally ripping it apart.
Their incentives just don't align with what makes the iPhone honestly so great for like so many people. It's just how I view it. It's like all these other app stores like Meta or Epic, they're really just trying to get a slice of the pie and like just make more money for themselves, even though it's not better for users to now have to go different places. And so I think they're just approaching all this, or the people that want third-party app stores just are approaching it from a completely different set of like priorities and stuff like that.
And sometimes you see these companies advocating for their alternative app stores or just different means, I suppose. But also these companies want to make money. They just want to take Apple's 30% and turn it into their 30% or 12 or 15 or whatever it is. Like Epic's not really out here going to bat for the Fortnite community. They're going to bat for their their platform and their business. Exactly.
Exactly. They're just, again, like, yeah, they just want to make more money, and they're big companies. And so big companies pretty much only care about that. But it's just so disconnected from what I think are the real problems with the App Store, which is app review, just like, or just that the fact that app review is all or nothing. Like, I do like app review. I like that Apple curates the App Store. I think it's one of the best things about it. But I just don't like that. Then if they make a dumb mistake, like they reject an app that shouldn't be rejected, then it's impossible to get the app in any way. That's just where I'm like, okay, well, maybe we could loosen up a bit. Or for apps that actually could be allowed, like Delta, my emulator. Like, I understand. Apple's never going to allow it. They're too tight with Nintendo to ever, like, really want to have an official Nintendo emulator on the store. But it still should exist, I feel like.
Well, it's so crazy because our computers.
Yeah.
I don't even know how many emulators I have on my computer right now to do different things or try different things out and play with software in unique ways. And phones are really only called phones out of habit. Today, what a kid thinks of as a phone is not what we think of as a phone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, these are just full personal computers that, like, our entire lives are now revolved around. So it's just a very different world than when the iPhone first came out as well.
And even outside of emulators, let's look at Game Pass. You mentioned them in the past and some stuff you wrote. Game Pass, totally official. Microsoft is making these deals, offering a streaming subscription service just like Netflix or any other video service just for video games. And that's not allowed on the platform because Apple can't personally review every single game. What do they review every show on Netflix?
Exactly. It literally breaks down just the same as that. And it comes down to they couldn't have done it for Netflix, but they can do it for this because it's a new paradigm. And that's also where Apple needs to, like, cut this out. Like, Apple needs to just chill out a little bit with, like, all these, like, ridiculous ways of controlling the App Store. And, like, and exactly, it's like we're seeing that it can't last forever. Like, they've gotten away with it, but now we're seeing new stuff, like, come up, new technologies. And we're seeing that it's hard to actually do innovation when Apple, like, rejects something that they just don't think matches their idea for the platform. And that's, again, like, those are the kind of things that annoy me the most. Like, back in the days when they would reject, like, apps with widgets in, like, the notification center and be like, oh, you can't put, like, interactive widgets in there. That's not the experience we want. It's like, whatever.
I miss the interactive widget. It made, like, Fantastical and calculators 10 times better.
Yeah. But, I mean, whatever.
Yeah. It's so strange. And I feel like the energy around Apple and the community this year is we're on the precipice of them opening up iOS to a degree, or iPadOS to a degree, mostly because legislation is kicking in from...
Absolutely not because they want to.
No, they are, I think, doing almost as little as they can to comply with, but...
I would bet exactly on that. They will truly do. I mean, we've seen them do it before. They've been petty with, like, the Netherlands dating app stuff, where they allow external payments, but then still require, 27%? It's like, that's Apple. Like, I'm expecting some level of that here. Yeah. If they could get away with it, I would not be surprised if they just did want 30% of alternative app store purchases. Because they'd be like, well, whatever. You can have your other app store. Still give us 30%. And you know what? I can see them doing it for sure.
They could. They absolutely could. Do you think they would use the system like they do on the Mac with notarization or anything like that, Gatekeeper, on iOS?
I can't see a world where they don't do at least some level of automated checking like that, because that gives them a lot of power to, like, reactively, like, shut down malware, stuff like that, which I think is what Apple does care about a lot. Like, it means that if there was a sideloaded app that really actually was, like, stealing user data, Apple does have the ability to just one button stop that from working on people's phones if it's notarized, because then they can just shut down whatever that approval, or they can then, while notarizing these apps, they can maybe say, hey, this app actually has some malware embedded in it, and they can stop it before it ever gets distributed in the first place. And so I think that's just, like, a really important safety net if you're getting rid of human review. Because it just means, you can catch anything that made it through.
Right. And the remote shutdown if needed later on.
Mm-hmm.
So the EU law, I forget the exact name of it or whatever, but they have to comply by 2024, which would indicate iOS 17. Is that what we're on? The number is getting so big now.
I know. I feel the same way. Yeah, it's iOS 17, which I've been mistakenly saying like iOS 18 sometimes. But yes, iOS 17, in theory, will be the one that enables this in some way, some form.
So does that get announced at WWDC this summer?
I think that depends on how Apple has decided to comply with the law. Because I have been thinking about it a lot. And basically, I think it comes down to two ways. And either Apple goes the sideloading route, where they say, hey, you can sideload, but we're not going to do the whole third-party App Store stuff. Or they do actually just do the third-party App Store things where Meta can have a store and Amazon can have a store. And so I think whether they announce at WWDC depends on which path they choose. If I were to guess, if they chose the sideloading path, where you can sideload one-off apps, I can very easily see them framing it, spinning it as like, oh, this is a cool new Mac OS feature. Now from the Finder, you can drag in an app that your friend sent you. With one drag, it can be installed to your phone. And then for Windows users, we've also allowed it through this way. Or I can see that spin. And they can like somewhat like get ahead of it and control that narrative. I can't see them spinning third-party app stores in any way that like is positive for them. And so if that's what they're going with, I bet they would not announce anything and kind of do like a press release or something like that closer to the release date. And so I think they just want to control the narrative as much. And it's only if they can't control it, they try to shove it under the table.
And I guess if it was just the sideloading route, that seems to have to my mind, a more positive message directly to developers. But if it's third-party app stores, who are you telling that to? You're telling it to Meta, Amazon,
exactly,
Adobe.
The customers don't care about that. Like they're like, it's like the disconnect's there. They don't realize what that good. They're like, okay, so there's another store. Versus the sideloading can be pitched like, hey, your friend just made an app on their iPad with Swift UI. They don't want to put it in the App Store. Do you want to just have it? They just email it to you. Put it through Finder. It's on your phone. It's like, boom. It's easy to see them positioning it as something like that.
Yeah. I can see the commercial now in my mind. It's what's a computer and someone's on an iPad making the app, like you said, and then they send it. There's a group message, or maybe they're in Freeform and they drag their app in there. They're all working on the app together.
I can see them doing that because, they can focus on like these one-off experiences. But it's like if they were to announce third-party stores, they'd have to announce why that's good. Like they have to say something, and it'd be like, now you can install Fortnite again? Like...
Epic's grand return to the App Store in the middle of their lawsuit. Like, there's no way they're going to play nice with each other on stage.
Exactly. So that's a game where I'm like, and you know, if Apple realizes they have to allow third-party stores, I think that's what will make them do it. If they're like, reading the law, we actually do need to allow like full competitive app stores. That's, I think, the only world I see them actually doing that. And in that world, I don't see them promoting it whatsoever. Because I see them just be like, you know what, or they'd warn it. They'd say, hey, this is coming, but here are the warnings you need to know. Like, they would present it as a bad thing, something like the opposite. I'm trying to picture, because I listen to Upgrade or something, and Jason Snell talks about, let's say Meta makes their own store, which I think is almost fact. If there's a store opportunity for them, they would make it. Yep. But do they just leave? Like, is the pull of Instagram, I guess, so strong that they could leave the App Store and force their user base, which has to be predominantly iOS, to move into this other segmented pie of installing and managing and updating apps? Instagram's big, but are they that strong? I think it really depends on the exact way Apple's going to go about this. Because I think Meta would do that. I bet Meta wants to do that. So I think they would do it unless it's just truly so impactful to their business. And to that, I think this process would have to be so much worse in the App Store in a way that like people wouldn't want to do it. But like, I definitely think they want it. And I do think Instagram has enough pull where if the barrier is low enough, they could get people to just switch over to it. Because it's like anything's so ingrained, like Spotify as well. I think Spotify also has a strong pull to be able to get people to switch from the App Store because they're not going to lose their Spotify library or they want to. And again, why I think Epic will definitely try to get Spotify in their store on something like that.
That would be music, I think, definitely has a stronger pull than Instagram or something like that.
Yeah. So Spotify,
that.
I think, is probably the number one because it's like that'd be a real hard sell. I'm losing my entire like library, my playlist, or I could keep them as go to the Epic Game Store, and I think that could be enough to get people to switch for that or something like that.
So what do you kind of, I think you detail it in the thread a little bit, or it may have been in your blog post, but this side loading process and what it could look like. I guess it's easy to picture.
Yeah.
You know, I bought a Pixel 7 last year to just kind of futz around with Android and get a gauge on that ecosystem. And I tried side loading an app because I wanted like the new recorder app update or something before it was out. And I got to say that experience was miserable. I was downloading another app from the Play Store.
Yeah.
Then downloading this app program file. I forget what the extension is over there, but then installing through the app on the phone, but there's all these warnings and complicated language, and you have to make sure you get the right file with it's a mess over there. And then the next day that after installing it worked, I turned the phone on the next day and the app doesn't work. And so it was just
that's crap.
Yeah, it was an awful experience, and I chalk that up to Android mostly, but Apple's method of side loading, whatever that may be, it can't be like that. Like that awful, but it has to be cumbersome to some degree, right?
Exactly. It has to. I don't see a world really where you just go to Safari, download an app, and it's installed like that easily. Like there's going to be some more barriers or just things you got to jump through on that. And I'm really split though on the security alerts because everyone suggests it and everyone says it. But man, I've seen firsthand from running like altStore, people don't read. Like they don't. Like literally, they will not read anything you throw at them, no matter how scary it looks. And so I know it sounds great in theory to say, hey, we got to do these scary alerts. But if there's an app someone wants, they will just follow a tutorial and they will just say yes to very scary alerts without even processing the danger. And so that's why I'm like, I don't think that's enough. I think what you need is something that's just scary on the surface that just deters people from doing it. So one of the things I say is like using a computer. So I think that's one way just to add friction. But I also see if they didn't do that route, I'd imagine something like you reboot your phone into like a DFU mode or something like that. And then you like do a terminal command or something like that level where it's like you can still follow the process, but it's scary to non-technical people. And people don't really appreciate how valuable that is as a tool. Like, it's what keeps altStore actually like really safe right now. Because it's like the only people willing to jump through all these hoops to install altStore are people that like know about all this stuff and are willing to like take those risks in the first place and understand it. And versus like no one's grandma's installing altStore because it's just too much to like try to get through. But I think that's good. I don't think people's grandparents should be installing altStore.
Well, you're saying my grandmother shouldn't be playing her NES ROMs on her iPhone?
I would love for her too, but there's a lot of stuff you do got to be aware of when you're side loading. And so if she's technologically savvy, go for it.
Okay. Duly noted.
That is how I view it, yeah. I think it should be actually scary or intimidating to make people like think it's a process to do it. Some hoops you have to jump through. Yeah, but I think maybe just saying yes to alerts is a little too easy, but who knows?
Yeah. When was it? I don't have the link open now at this moment, but it was in August of 2021. I reviewed Delta and kind of futzed around with it.
Oh yeah, I read your review on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm glad you like it.
Yes, I do. The thing, though, with Delta, and it's not your fault at all, it's the thing with altStore and just in general, is this 7-day kind of, you have to re-sign it.
Oh God, yes. It's the worst thing about this. Yes,
it's a huge deterrent because I had a reminder in my phone, and eventually it was like, I gotta let it go. But I say all that now because before our show yesterday, I was like, I'll reinstall altStore Delta Dolphin, see if it's as easy as I remember it being. And I got to tell you, man, it is.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
I still had it installed on my Mac in the plugin in Mail, but everything needed to be updated. I still had to go into preferences, yada, yada, yada. And I mean, 3 clicks later, I'm in and done. But I was at least tech savvy enough to do the initial setup back then and go through with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think, so obviously you designed the way to take advantage of Apple's own process. You've designed it to work this way with altStore. How do you see that compared to what Apple could potentially do? You're working within current constraints, but they could evolve that or change. Do you think it should be more difficult than the way you currently, for example, have it set up?
I definitely don't think it should be more difficult, because I do think there are certain restrictions that are just pretty ridiculous that I deal with because, like, I don't have another choice. But that being said, I think they'll be somewhat similar in a way. So the specific things I expect to change from like what I'm dealing with now is the 7 days going away. Like
please.
It's like, it's so ridiculous that your app will just expire after a week if you don't like do anything about it. Like, absurd. Apple did it to prevent anyone from doing something like altStore. So it's like, yeah, that'll go away. So once you get an app installed, it'll at least stay installed and work. And that to me, I think will be a huge thing, because people can go through the process one time. It's a lot to be constantly doing the process. So I expect that to go away. Also, right now, you're only limited to 3 apps installed at a time if you're not a developer, and that's ridiculous. So I expect you to be able to sideload more than 3 apps. And then another thing is you can only register 10 app IDs per week. And that's really hard to explain to my users, because an app ID is just like either the app or the app extension. Like if an app has like an app and then 3 app extensions, you have to register 4 app IDs with Apple to make that work. But there's like a maximum of 10, and it's rolling over a 7-day basis. And it's so confusing to explain to people. They're like, why can't I install this app? And I'm like, oh, it's because you just have to wait 3 days. So stuff like that is just ridiculously overcomplicated. Will just go away. But I think the process overall would be similar. Just the process without the long-term restrictions. Like, I think it'd be just a cumbersome thing to install, like altStore, may require a computer or something weird like that. And I think it'll be like definitely not as convenient as the App Store. Like, it'll feel like a second-class citizen to the App Store.
Yeah. But I think almost as it should.
Yes, and I want that. I think, I'm not trying to compete with the App Store. Like, I really have no interest in that whatsoever.
And I don't think the bulk of people's apps on their phones would be coming from a side-loaded means. My Mac is different because I've been using a Mac for, I don't know, since I was in 8th grade. So everything's been collected over time. I have no idea where anything came from. It just now exists on my computer. But my phone, I've settled into most of the stuff that I do. And then when the side-loading world becomes reality, there will be things that I do download, like a Delta. I would love to see more powerful video editing or audio editing software come to the iPad.
That's a huge one, yeah. Like, again, like stuff that's technically allowed, but Apple's just like really rejecting or holding back because they're being creative about certain like iOS limitations, or they're using certain like unofficial features, which I get in a perfect world Apple doesn't want. But sometimes the real world, to make like a production app, you need to do things that maybe Apple doesn't want you to do to get like the best result. And so we just need to remove that like human curation element that's stopping like cool innovative stuff like this. So yeah, productivity apps I think will be huge. Compile like any programming language that's not Swift can now exist on the iPad. Wow, crazy. Tremendously more useful.
And I think also the power that these devices have now, I don't even know what chip number we're on in the iPhones, A15, 16, whatever it is. I mean,
God,
but then the
that.
iPads now have the M2 just sitting in them. And I feel like side-loading apps that take advantage of this power would not only unlock potential for users and developers, but also, I would think, give Apple a little bit of competition. Like, tap into your iPad a bit more. Put Logic on here. Where's Final Cut?
It kills me. Yeah, it really does. Like, or like a recent example. I'm gonna totally butcher the name, but the Switch emulator Ryujinx or whatever.
Okay.
They just ported their Switch emulator to Mac for like the M1 Mac.
Okay.
And it could run full speed, and it's using like Metal and everything natively. And then I'm just sitting here like, the iPad also has an M1 chip. This means that this is technically possible, but it's not allowed in the App Store. And so no one's going to take like the dedicated time to port it to the iPhone. And I'm like, Apple, you could have literally like Switch emulation running full speed on your iPad right now if you just like let people push the boundaries. But yes, it's very frustrating to me to see the power of the Mac, and now that the iPad has the exact same chip in it, and see how limited the iPad is.
It's, Dolphin, also when the M1s came out, they ported Dolphin over to Apple Silicon, and the performance gains alone in the emulator were phenomenal. And imagine, I know there's a port of Dolphin on iOS that's not a part of the official, actually altStore is allows you to put Dolphin on your phone, which is so much fun.
And I love it.
It just, there's potential here to tap in and to use Apple's own tools more effectively on the platform instead of waiting for, I don't know, like they just put Resident Evil Village on the Mac App Store. Well, that uses the same chip. Why is Resident Evil Village not on the iPad? As weird as that would be, but why isn't it on there? You can use controllers now.
It just, exactly. And that's why also for a while, before like the EU law was passed, I thought if Apple was ever going to allow sideloading, they would have to just do it. They'd do it for the iPad only. Because I could get the arguments even like, the iPhone, like, still not, like, it's still quote unquote a phone. But I was like, the iPad here, they're trying to make a computer. And there's just no world the iPad can compete in this as like a laptop if it's still limited by Apple View. That to me is just a fundamental fact. I'm like, because it's too often you're like, oh, I can't do this workflow on the iPad. And it's like that just should stop happening by now. Like, it really just should not be a thing that, I get that Apple wants to control it, but if you're trying to use an iPad for productivity, we should be allowing developers to make productivity apps for the iPad to address all these shortcomings of it. But until that happens, like the App Store way will never allow the iPad to reach its full potential. I'm convinced of that.
It feels like we're on the precipice of almost a revival, maybe too strong a word, but in the development and ingenuity scene around iOS and iPadOS. Once things open up, it's kind of what it feels like to me.
And that's one of the things I'm honestly the most excited for, because I don't think everyone's really realized how boring apps have become like recently. Like, I fell in love with the iPhone back when like apps were new and the people were experimenting with cool new things that didn't matter, but they were fun. Like the beer drinking app where you just hold your phone up to your, like stupid stuff like that. And that you ask someone, why do you need that? And you'd say, I don't. It's fun. I feel like Apple's forgotten that, how fun stupid things can be. And now they've been like, oh no, the App Store has to be like for all these things that like are really important or like have a business side or anything, that are going to make money. And I'm like, we just want like these quirky little apps to get that like just push the boundaries in weird ways that aren't like full-fledged like production apps. Like, we don't want to have to be like, oh, now I'm signing up for like distributing it. Just like make a quick GitHub project to test out a feature, put it out, let some people install it. And then if people like it, then they know to go after it. But right now it's like you have to commit to building an app from the beginning and then hope that it has a market. And then if you get rejected, whatever.
Yeah.
Instead of just like feeling out maybe ahead of time, oh, there actually is a market for this app. Now I will invest time into it and making like a real App Store app.
Yeah. I think that actually leads pretty perfectly into your own app, your Delta. But before we jump to Delta, I feel obligated to, I should say, bring up the documentation for altStore. My day job is a technical writer, so I write manuals and this type of stuff. I love it. I was clicking around altstore.io and just, seeing how you do things. And honestly, I used it to refresh myself to make sure I was installing Delta correctly on my phone. And I just have to I have to pat both of you on the back. I think your documentation is beautiful. It's clear.
Wow.
It's super helpful.
Thank you. That honestly means a lot, because when I brought Shane on board like last year to help me out with like managing all this, that was one of the first things we had to get to work on. I was like, there's honestly a lack of just like core information for new people on like how to get set up with altStore and how to use all this stuff. Because like a year ago, there was nothing on the website. The website FAQ was really like a basic question and answers, but like I was relying really on like organic like tutorials being made by other people. But so then when Shane came on board, it was like one of his like first priorities was like, we need to build up this documentation. We need to make it easy for people to answer their own questions so that we don't have to be answering all the questions, and just let them like solve questions themselves. So I'm really glad that you approve that, especially with your background, because a lot of work went into it.
I do. I think they look great. The screenshots are super clean and clear. The steps are awesome. You've got videos embedded where it makes sense. I like it a lot. I remember the first time I installed Delta. Really, I think the first app I installed was Dolphin in I think an older method. But Snazzy Labs, Quinn Nelson, he's made a few videos, and I've used him.
Yeah, I love him. I love this Dolphin video. That was great.
Yeah, I remember putting Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door on my iPhone and feeling like I was committing witchcraft to some degree, like this, forbidden method of playing. But I mean, you've got a section with error codes and nice little icons. I love
the error like that's been truly our past endeavor for the past 6 months. Was like, okay, we need to really revamp a lot of our error handling, because there was a lot of, again, like information being dropped. Like an altStore, it shows that little alert. Like if something goes wrong, it's a tiny little alert, but that's not enough information to show a lot. And so we're like, hold on, we need to put a lot more information out there. And so the past 6 months, we've literally been like revamping error handling to make it easier for people to look up error codes they're seeing and all this stuff. And so, another huge thing that's like not a priority when you launch, but it's like one of those things you need to build out as you're evolving the platform. Yeah. So I'm glad it's working.
Yeah. Well, great job. Love the documentation. Big fan.
Really appreciate that.
I get one more thing, I guess, before we go to Delta. Just in this world where Apple allows sideloading, what happens to altStore?
So, good question. Because one is we have to wait and see exactly. But what I would love for altStore to be, like my perfect world, is I would want to position altStore as whatever Apple makes the process for sideloading be. I want altStore to be like maybe a convenience on top of that, or a way to discover all these third-party apps, or just an easy way for indie devs to put out their apps. I really just want to establish altStore as the niche for apps that aren't either ready for the App Store or aren't allowed in the App Store. And because I think there can be a strong market there that can coexist with the App Store. And so that's really what I want. Basically, so I want altStore Day without the stupid restrictions. And then I would be very happy.
Yeah, I think that would be ideal. It's like a curated just space for new cool apps that people should check out.
Quirky, fun, things that you haven't seen before, because it's gotten stale. The App Store has just become so overpopulated with apps and stuff. It's just not a fun playground for new ideas anymore. And so I think a smaller market will actually just be more fun for that. Similar in a way to Mastodon compared to Twitter now. Obviously Twitter's way bigger, but Mastodon, all these developers making Mastodon clients, and the developer ecosystem is really just big on Mastodon. And I think that's a huge reason Mastodon could be a success, is because it can be smaller but have dedicated users to make the space separate from Twitter.
I like it. It sounds good over there. It's exciting. Looking forward to this year with Apple.
Yeah, this year will be a lot.
This year's going to be a ton, actually. Holy smokes. When you start thinking about what's supposed to happen this year,
Oh my God, yeah.
the Mac Pro should theoretically finally make the jump to Apple Silicon. There's USB-C on the iPhone, possibly.
Amazing.
All the side loading.
Phenomenal.
And
Yeah.
then this headset, whatever the headset will be.
God, I know. That's also just like so much of the Apple Sphere talking about right now. I mean, I'm also incredibly excited for.
Yes, I'm a big...
I've been excited for it for years, even though I was originally definitely on board for the Apple glasses and a little more skeptical on the headset VR side, but we'll see.
I've been a proponent of VR ever since I tried. I was like walking between classes one day at UCF, and they had like a Vive set up in the middle of this engineering building. So I tried it out. I've just been a huge fan of VR since. Not in the Zuckerberg metaverse sense of spend all day, more the get in here and play and have fun or do unique things. On the similar to the tangent of if you're into it, something, you'll go through whatever steps it takes to make it happen. I remember when Nintendo released the Labo patch for Breath of the Wild. You can play Breath of the Wild in stereoscopic 3D, but you got to have this tablet strapped to your face. But some people figured out how to take the original PSVR, and it's just mismatch of cables and plug it into a Switch dock, but also plug it into a PS4.
Oh, wait. Whoa.
Yes. It's basically splitting the cable at the end a little further and like dock, because the PlayStation has to power the processor thing, but it's just an HDMI. Long story short, I'm like laying on the floor in my apartment trying to stay close to where all this stuff's plugged in all nicely to make Zelda on my face work. And it does. And that's just... So VR, I'm excited to see what they do.
Oh, that's really cool that worked out. And I think that's true because I do think VR has potential for sure. And the only thing that I can just think is I trust Apple. I still trust Apple that they're only going to enter the space if it makes sense. And so I think I have a similar feeling Gruber wrote his article about the head, or he's written some piece about the headset. And it's like, a lot of these rumors make it sound weird, but I don't think Apple would release a weird product. So there's either something the rumors aren't fully grasping, or it's we're missing the full picture. Because I feel the same way. I'm like the external battery pack. I'm like, oof. An external battery pack for this thing? That seems a little rough. But who knows? Maybe it's an optional thing, or maybe it's it just truly the experience makes up for it, but I don't know. It is kind of weird.
I see both sides to the battery thing. Obviously, it's just visually not as appealing because there's a cord dangling and there's a hot battery in your pocket or on your hip. Yeah. That's just not appealing. PSVR 1 is, I don't know, 2 cables from the headset into the processor, and then that's a whole mess behind the TV. Cables aren't fun. That's why the Quest 2 is so successful, because
it's true. Yes,
it's hands-free, wireless, totally put it on and go.
That's what you need for the immersion feel.
So that's that. You hear a battery pack and it's a step back, but it makes it last longer theoretically than the Quest. Certainly longer, I would think, than the Meta Quest Pro, which I think has an hour and a half battery life. You could buy multiple batteries, which I'm sure Apple would love if this was the case, and you could just hot swap, almost like an Xbox controller where you just pop in AA's and you're good to go, full charge. So I see that side of it, and the comfort of whatever this headset is, which sounds pretty technologically advanced and dense up there. That's another benefit of PSVR compared to something like the Quest. It's lighter on the face, especially in front of your eyes.
And I do think that will matter a lot for this. Because, again, I'm still not convinced this is, going to be something I wear all day. But if it is, or if I'm supposed to be wearing it for, still hours at a time, it has to be comfortable enough like that. It just has to. And so if the battery pack made it light enough that, I guess that would be some trade-off. It'd be better than a heavy headset. I guess I'm just concerned that I just don't want this product to be released before it was ready. Like, if we could have waited a year without the battery pack, that's I guess my biggest thing is like, is this now the time? But I trust Apple. I feel like they're like, you know what? This is now the time to release this headset with everything.
It is. And the thing that we don't know, part of that full picture you're talking about, is arguably the best thing Apple is known for, which is their marriage of hardware and software and interacting in this space. You know, the Quest 2 software, as nice as it is, honestly, it's genuinely nice. It's really Android, just with the skin over it. And when you poke, you can see that. And sometimes it just doesn't quite work. But the idea of an Apple OS in a virtual space is appealing to me. And seeing what they can come up with this, this is the company that pinched to Zoom, just how do we extend
something so simple? Yeah.
The natural way into the virtual world. I'm curious and excited to see what they have been cooking up over the past however many years they've been working on this.
Yeah, however you're going to be interacting with stuff, I think is going to be that's what I want to see the most. I'm so fascinated by what they settle on. Like, all we can think of is basically like pointers and stuff. And I'm like, is Apple just going to be point at things? And then no, I feel like I would bet on a more immersion tactic, like, I don't know, reaching out, doing stuff, but who knows? Who knows? We'll see. I'm excited for it because, it's a whole new paradigm that we haven't really seen, come up with a good way of doing it. We've just seen lots of attempts of UIs in the virtual world.
Yeah. So, Apple headset tangent, we'll bridge it into Delta here. Delta, Nintendo emulator, Virtual Boy emulator?
You know what? I think if we have the headset, I think that'd be a great system to add. I think just even if we're just to say that it had it, even if I was never going to really make it a full supported thing, like, hey, it's just for fun. Try out Virtual Boy in the headset.
Go through the effort of doing it. You can sideload a Virtual Boy emulator onto your Quest 2, and I went through those steps, which that's awesome. It's quite a process, though. You've got to put your headset in developer mode, blah, blah, blah. So I think Delta on the headset would be nice. You could see all your games on a 120-inch virtual screen.
I think the headset would be an amazing fit for Delta, personally. And so as soon as Apple announces it, I'm going to be trying to see, what can I do with it? How could I put Delta on it? And because I'm imagining easy, just put screens everywhere, just easy one. Or and I'm also imagining with the glasses, how great that future would be. Like, when you just have your glasses in the real world and just have a Pokemon game going, your top right corner you can just play or something like that. I think it would be a great fit. The real question is Apple going to allow sideloading onto the headset? And
interesting. I guess I'm just assuming yes, because the iPhone has to allow it. And I assume it's all roughly similar.
I'm betting it would be similar to the Apple Watch, where the first Apple Watch, you were installing apps to the iPhone. And then the iPhone was then putting those apps on the watch. And so if they did something similar here, then if you can sideload to the iPhone, you should be able to sideload to the headset. But there is a world where if they are trying to make this actually a standalone device, that maybe they're like, you know what, it's not tied to the iPhone. If you have an iPhone, it'll show you, but the rumors are it has an M2 chip or whatever, so
oh my goodness.
If they go, I know, crazy. So if they go that completely separate route, then it's you know what, maybe they won't allow sideloading because the law doesn't say you need to allow sideloading for headsets. And so I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be disappointed, but I'd be very sad.
I agree with you. I could see it. I could see them making that segmentation, but I think that segmentation is anti-Apple's to a certain degree these days because their platforms are so woven together, and it's part of the sell is stuff on your iPhone comes on your Mac, it's on your iPad, it's on your watch, your AirPods transition between everything, So I do think it would feel very strange if every other platform could load apps from other places, whatever those means are, except the headset, because then it gets really, that could get messy.
It depends on how you view the other platforms. Because, for example, I don't think they're going to allow sideloading on Apple TV. I don't think the law requires it. And as much as I want to put Delta on the Apple TV, because I think it'd be perfect, I don't see them allowing that. Because I'm just like, I don't think Apple actually gets anything for them. And annoying. Like, I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool. But I don't think they allow that. And so that's why I'm like, it depends how this headset's positioned to them. Like, if they view it as like an Apple TV accessory where it's not like a dominant thing, they could be like, it's not your primary computing device, whatever. But if they were like trying to replace, like if this was like the eventual like replacement for the iPhone, then I would think there'd be some side loading, either though maybe it'd have to be another law. Like, jeez. I don't trust Apple to be like benevolent about this kind of thing at all.
That's a very fair point. So Delta, we've talked about it here and there. The origin of Delta, GBA for iOS. It was a school project, right?
Yeah, or just something I made while in high school, just because I wanted to play Game Boy games on my phone. Like, to me, it was just I'd been developing apps for like a couple of years by then, and I was like looking for a new thing to work on, and I came across like old open source code base for like a jailbreak app that let you play like Game Boy Advance. It was GPS phone or whatever. So, and I was like, it'd be really cool if I could just like hack this thing together and get it to just compile and put on my own phone so that I could just be playing Game Boy Advance games. And that was like really just it. And so I did it for me. And then I also like installed it on some of my friends' devices. And then it was just coincidentally around that time, there was a service called Mac Build Server that said, hey, we have enterprise certificates, which are like the things you can buy from Apple for companies to distribute apps internally. Mm-hmm. And they were saying, hey, if you connect your open source app to our service, you can sign it with our certificate and anyone can download it as if they're part of our company. And so I was like, oh, whoa. This is like back in like 2013. And I was like, oh, wow. A way to distribute apps outside the App Store? Sounds great. So I just hooked up GBA for iOS to the service. And then turns out people really wanted to do that. And so, yeah, that I learned really quickly that there's a big demand for playing like Game Boy games and the classic apps or classic, video games on the iPhone. And so I learned from that. And then Apple eventually shut that down because I was using it. They shut down certificate, and then there was a weird bug I exploited. But anyway, they shut it down within a year. And so I was like, okay, that was really cool to learn that there actually is like this market for people that want to play these old games. And so I was going into college that year. And so I was like, you know what? I think what I want to do is now like make this like actually my priority. Like not just a hack together like side app. I want like to make a real like emulator app that I dedicate all my time to make it really polished. And so I thought that'd be fun. Oh, and also around this time was Swift was announced. So I was like, oh, I need to learn Swift somehow. I need a new project to work on to learn Swift. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just learn Swift and like make a personal project, like build up this cool emulator and see where it goes. And so it started with like, hey, I just wanted to learn Swift and do this for fun. But then what changed that for me was, I think a few months after I started working on it, I went to WWDC and I had like a meeting with the app review team there. And I basically said, hey, I'm working on this emulator. And is there any way at all that I can put this in the App Store? Like, I understand that it's a gray area, but I will do anything. I'll jump however high you tell me. I'll do whatever you say. Mm-hmm. And then I talked to people and they were saying, yes, you know what? Our problem with it is that it's like an open pipeline of games. Like we can't review all the games and make sure they're safe. Very similar to the Game Pass argument. But I believe them. I was like, so our problem with it is that we don't want to allow any game. So we will allow Delta if you like send us a list of ROMs to review with like every update. And then you can have a whitelist of like approved games. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll send you a list of Pokemon and Mario games at first, and then people can play, and then I'll like update lists. So it was like a stupid restriction, but I was like, whatever. So with Apple's blessing, I was like, cool. I'm actually now going to treat this more seriously. It's not going to be just my personal project for Swift. I'm going to like dedicate all my time to it. And so then I worked on that for the next year, and then that the next dub, I met with the app review team again. I met with the same person. And just to catch him up on how I was doing. And then he basically said, so yeah, I talked to the higher ups. We can't allow emulators in any way whatsoever. And so that was just really frustrating, upsetting. Just I felt all the emotions because I had invested so much time into Delta, knowing that there's a market for it, and to what I thought knowing that I'd be able to distribute it in the App Store. Mm-hmm. And so just for Apple to then say, nope, actually you can't do anything with it. I mean, it pissed me off. Yeah. And I was like, I understood, but I was really pissed off that I'd been let on. And so I was like, I'm not going to throw away all this work. So whatever. So that's when I was like, started on the whole altStore track of, I need to find some way to distribute this outside of App Store. And I don't care how cumbersome it is. And eventually I just try to come up with like the least cumbersome way that could exist. But yeah, all this is because I just wanted to be making a Nintendo emulator. I think it's fun. I love playing Nintendo games on my phone. Yeah. I think, the DS especially is awesome. Just being able to play all the touchscreen games on the iPhone.
Yes.
So amazing. Like, so perfect. Or if you're on the iPad, like if you have a stylus, I'm like, yep. What a great experience this is.
Oh, I mean, I want to touch on the DS, but before we get specifically to that, what is it like building an emulator? I've never, ever, I just use them. So my brain, you have to understand how to read these games, portray them accurately to some degree, allow for different things. Like, what is that process like? I'm curious.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I should start off by saying that I haven't written any like the true emulator cores that I'm using.
Okay. You're using cores, other cores.
I'm using cores that like have open source made by other people because my background is an iOS app developer. Like I started learning programming with Apple, with the iPhone stuff. And so that's all I've known. And so when I started working on GBA for iOS, it was wrapping that open source existing code base and then wrapping it into like an app that I can write, like wrapping it in an iOS app.
Gotcha.
And so that's my focus for Delta. So I have not written these from the ground up, but from working on it now for a long time, I've learned a lot about how it works under the hood because I've now had to go in multiple times. Melon DS especially, or the DS core I'm using, Melon DS, I really wanted to make sure that DS was working well on the iPhone. So I would go into that. I went into that code base and would make some changes to like optimize it for iPhone or stuff like that. And that was really fun to be like doing some like low level stuff on it. But still, I just have to, the people who are building these code bases are way smarter than I am. Like they are doing incredibly advanced things to be able to exactly replicate all the nuances of these old hardware systems and get perfect emulation and accuracy. It's really impressive. And it's a skill set I want to, like my long-term goal would be, I would love to write one of the cores for Delta myself. Like take the time to write the NES core in Swift and be like, hey, this is actually my like NES emulator now. Because I think it'd be a cool thing to do. Who knows when I'll have time to do that. It's definitely not a priority, but it would be fun.
I think that would be super fascinating on a technical level.
Exactly.
God, I feel like, are there game emulators written in Swift? Like, I don't even know if that's a thing.
None that are, well, I wouldn't surprise me if someone's made a proof of concept one.
Sure.
But I think Swift, because of it's very performant, but also really nice to write, I think it'd be really cool to write like cutting edge emulator in Swift. And also, the reason I want to do it, I could put it in Swift Playgrounds and be like, hey, it's no hacks. It's just literally a Swift Playground, just running a full NES emulator. Because right now I've done ways to put my emulators in Swift Playgrounds, but they require compiling to WebAssembly and running it through a web browser, and it's really hacky.
Yeah,
so, it's a mess.
Sounds like it would be. And if you wrote something in Swift like that, you would be able to tap into Metal and other Apple APIs and tools, right?
It'd be easy to do that. Yes, I can already do that in theory if I wanted to. With some of it, I'm not using Metal yet. I'm still using OpenGL for a lot of stuff because a lot of old emulators just expect you to be using OpenGL. But yes, it's the real reason I think I'm using all these newer APIs or the Apple first APIs or writing my own core in Swift is I think that's just what the future looks like for Apple platforms is more and more you're going to be having to use their APIs or stuff like that. And so I view it as future proofing. I'm if I have a Swift NES emulator, that will always be available to run on Apple platforms. Even if they're like, hey, we don't allow C++, they're like, no matter what they decide to do, I'm like, if I have a Swift app, I can keep that modern and updated for like Apple platforms. And that's why Delta, the app itself, is all Swift. Like everything I'm writing is just Swift. The only non-Swift code is when I have to wrap like the emulator cores themselves.
Gotcha.
And I did that because I think banking on the future for Apple platforms specifically, you just always want to be using what they're recommending. And so using Swift from the beginning, I want to start doing more and more Swift UI in Delta because I would bet strongly that the headset will require Swift UI for actual like full experiences. But yeah, just all this. I think it's just like in general, banking on using all Apple first party technologies is a good bet if you're an Apple developer.
It's probably the safe camp to be in.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of touches on one of my questions about your design philosophy. You're using the Apple tools. Delta has this Apple touch to it. There's peek and pop, rip, I guess, force touch.
I love peek and pop.
It's the thing I miss the most. I just upgraded from a 10s Max to a 14 Pro Max, and peek and pop is the thing I miss the most.
I'm with you, and I loved it. It's why I specifically put it in Delta, because I was like, oh, it's just so nice to like just peek into like a game or something and like just see what's happening. Like, I don't know. RIP.
There's playfulness to it and usefulness, but playfulness, and it pairs well with games. But you know, your Delta feels like an Apple app. It has that Apple kind of flair to it, and so I'm just curious about your design philosophy as you're sitting down. You've got NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, DS. I think Genesis is even in there. You know, I get not Nintendo. Well, these days, NSO, you can get Genesis games, so it's kind of...
You're right, that's true. I know, I did fudge. It does make the marketing for Delta a little harder now, where I'm like, Nintendo emulator, also Genesis.
Plus Genesis. Yeah. Whatever. So, what is that process like for you, your philosophy there?
So, first of all, it really does mean a lot that you're saying that it feels like an Apple app, because that is really what I always strive for. Because, like, just as an indie developer, the dream is always to like get an Apple Design Award for your app and just to make an experience that like could be displayed at WWDC or something like that. And so I've always been really inspired to just make really great apps that could be like a level of that, another level of Apple. So that's just in general my philosophy. But then especially for like emulators, I was just like so painfully aware of how ugly and technical and just like really intimidating the emulator scene can be to people, or just using emulators. Like they're really cool technologically, but man, they kind of look jank if you ever like use these systems. And I'm like, I like that I'm playing these games, but like I just really feel like so many people aren't even trying emulators out because they're deterred by how hacky or technical it feels, or like they'll give you all the options you could possibly imagine for your emulation setup. And so to me, I learned for me, that was overwhelming. Like I didn't like using emulators that just seemed seemed like tools. I wanted instead to play games like with an experience. And so I really was like, if I'm building this emulator and people are already jumping through all these hoops, I don't want it to feel like like thrown together or whatever, like just like, I don't know, crappy app. I want to feel like this is what emulation could be like. Like this is the joy. This is fun, just playing your old games. And so much of that, like there's a lot of those things. Like in GBA for iOS, I use the word ROM. I don't use the word ROM anywhere in Delta because I'm like, that's just like such a deterrent for people that don't know what this is. So it's just games everywhere. Just download your games, use your games. Small things like that, I think makes a huge difference to people. Yeah. And so I also think it's really a fun challenge to try to bridge this gap between like the really advanced technical people who want this and also like the Apple lovers who really like polished experiences.
Oh yeah. One of the things I love about Delta is when you pull in your game or your ROM, but your game, and you load art for it right away.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the things that emulators just will pull it in and it'll just have a question mark. And it's like, well, I know what game that is. That's Pokemon Emerald or Super Metroid. And you're pulling in art from different databases and give options to change. Yeah. You allow skins to change the control scheme, which is just
the skins. Yeah, that's one of my personal favorite features about Delta, and that was because back in the day for GBA for iOS, my friend, who's still my friend, but we were working together on GBA for iOS at the time, and he was the one that pitched me on, hey, you should let people like customize this. You should let people like make their experience exactly how they want, instead of just like this whatever like skin I had. And so he pitched me hard, and he like designed like 5 different skins for me. Like one was made of wood, one was like a Squirtle-y like Pokemon one, and I was like, oh, wait, you're right. This is amazing. Like, why would anyone not want to be able to customize it? And so from that point on, I've been like, oh, focusing really hard on that aspect of just, customizing Delta, so you can just really recreate the exact experience you want.
Well, I mean, I've also got to say, though, your skins, the defaults are beautiful. They have polish to them that most emulators, I would argue, don't have. And just their visual appearance. It's not even the functionality of it could just be a transparent button map like most iOS games are today. It's functionally the same, but you're presenting it in this beautiful wrapper or skin of a controller that feels like the console that you're playing.
And that, yes, exactly. That was, again, a very important part. It's like, I want it to feel like you're playing the system. And when you have a touch screen, it's hard to fully recreate that. So I was like, how can I make it feel like you're playing NES and like that recreate that feeling? But I was like, oh, if you have like that NES controller skin, that gives you that semblance of like, be using a real NES, or like, the N64 skin as well. Like, how can I possibly put all these buttons onto a touchscreen in a way that can also look good? But then we were able to do that. But I also have to say, all of the credit for the skins goes to my best friend Caroline, who's helped with altStore and also a lot of Delta stuff. She's an incredible designer, and I am not. So I can recognize that these look good, but I understand why emulators don't look great, because man, I would not be able to produce these beautiful skins like she can. And I'm so thankful that she's willing to help us out. We can literally reach out to her and be like, hey Caroline, we're adding a new system to Delta. Would you mind like helping us design a new skin? And then she'll be like, yeah, sounds great. And then she'll blow us away with like such a beautifully like recreated skin that also like works on the iPhone. So
it's
huge props to her.
She's the best. Pass along my thanks, because it truly is one of my favorite parts of Delta in that experience.
Oh yeah, I absolutely will.
The feel, another part of the feel, you have haptics. You're using the Taptic engine.
Yes.
Oh my goodness gracious. It changes touch gaming on the iPhone.
For sure. I can't imagine playing without it, because you just don't realize how much a game, like you kind of rely on knowing that the button was pressed. Like just knowing that it happened. Without that feedback, when like before and earlier GBA for iOS stuff, I'm like, oh, it just felt wrong. You like didn't know if your button was pressed, and that just like disoriented you. And it just makes me more confident using touchscreen controls. So I love that feature too.
I love it. Another thing that Apple now supports pretty officially is game controllers, which would be the next step away from it. I don't know if you remember my tweet from, I think it was a year. Well, I guess it was around the Delta review, so about a year and a half ago. But I was able to hook up a real N64 controller to Delta and play Super Mario.
With the adapter?
Yes, I used like a daisy chain of adapters.
Yeah. Yes, I do remember. That was sick. That was amazing.
It's super fun. I love it so much. Just the fact that it was even possible. But most people aren't going to go through a daisy chain. Now there's an official N64 Switch controller, which I'm sure I could just hook up via Bluetooth and that would work away.
So I bought that, and I was really excited for it. It shows up in the iOS settings as a Bluetooth controller. I can connect to it, but I cannot get any games to recognize it yet. And I'm like, so I think maybe it's still being rolled out support for it. I don't know. But here I have this. I've tried out like the NES ones. These work fine. Like these do work. And so I could use this in Delta, and I'm like, oh, thank you, Apple. What an amazing gift you gave me. Being able to use official Nintendo controllers to play Nintendo games on your iPad.
Yeah.
It's too good.
So how has that controller support been in general, just outside of a Nintendo? Because Apple supports the PlayStation controller, the Xbox. And while you don't have cores for those, those controllers can be used. Was that easy to implement these tools?
That was Apple. Thankfully, has made it easy to at least add decent game controller support, because I've supported game controllers back from when it was just like the MFI controllers that Apple allowed, and I'm glad I did. But yeah, the adoption was not as high on those. People were not buying those like dedicated controllers. But I invested the time. Yeah, they were, and just not as good quality. But so I take it back. The black backbone, that's great. I love my backbone when that came out eventually. But then just when Apple finally, when they announced the PlayStation controllers and the Xbox controller support, that to me was when I was like, okay, this is like when it matters now. Because before people, like some people had it, but after that, almost everyone had controllers. And so I had already had basic controller support, but then I was making sure that was like a primary feature of Delta to be like, yes, touchscreen's great, but now that you can use real game controllers that you probably already own, that's way better. And then, so yeah, when Apple then finally added support for Switch controllers on iOS 16, truly the icing on the cake for me to be like, oh, now if you have a Joy-Con, you can play Delta, or if you just have, two Joy-Cons, you can do two-player like Delta stuff, and so.
That's true. I didn't even think of that.
Oh, yeah, Apple's done a great job with it. You can like hold down two buttons to either turn the two Joy-Cons into one controller, or you can separate them out into two. It's really amazing that I'm like, the iPad basically just is a Switch now with the support. And so that to me is like, the game controller stuff is what makes emulation worth it. I do also have keyboard support. And so on my iPad with like the Magic Keyboard, it will work like a computer, but it's not the same immersion.
It doesn't feel the same. It never has.
It never. No.
So the other element of feel here is that DS emulation. I mean, flat out, I think this is the best way to emulate a DS game. Hands down, because
awesome.
the touch screen on the DS, you have to be able to touch. Clicking with a mouse is not the same.
Exactly. It's just like, I mean, you're nailing it. That just it kicks you out of it. You're not playing a Nintendo DS game if you're using a mouse. It's it just breaks a barrier. But when you're literally touching the touchscreen on the iPhone, when I had that working, it's like I also was like, it is my favorite system in Delta, and I really just think it's the best showcasing of how emulation can be done in a way for newer platforms that take advantage of all of the iPhone's capabilities. Because the iPhone has a microphone, the iPhone has the camera. So if I wanted to add like DSi support, I could make like the DSi. It has like all these things. Like, oh man, the DS is so perfect for Delta that I really wanted to take a lot of time to make sure I could really capture that experience as best as I could.
Yeah, I love it. I was exploring Delta as an option to maybe stream or capture some DS gameplay footage, and at the time I had the 10s Max, and it wasn't feasible with the current setup. It's something I would definitely consider now, especially if I was playing the game for my own enjoyment instead of some sort of technical thing. Like, I'll just load a DS ROM on my computer for something quick, but the full experience, like sitting down and playing something, it just feels natural and right. And I love it. I'm so glad that it's a system within Delta.
Yeah, I love it. It's definitely the system I've played the most personally for me in Delta, because just like, I mean, I also loved the DS as a kid.
Oh yeah,
huge Nintendo fan, if you can't tell. But the DS is great, and so I played while working on Delta. I've played so much Mario Kart DS or New Super Mario Bros. Or playing through Pokemon Heart Gold or Diamond or whatever, and just like investing so much time in that. Because again, also the DS is so great for iPhone because it's like portable. You can just put it in your phone or put it in your pocket, and then if you're out and about, you could just pick it up and play a few minutes of the DS game, which is not always the same for like an N64 game, which I mean Delta supports, but you want to play that more at home. Generally, is what I'm learning, and so I think for the iPhone specifically, the DS is so great. And Game Boy too. But I love using it.
The DS just it's so right.
It's just right. Yeah.
It's the way it's supposed to be.
It's just a match made in heaven.
And in a world where the 3DS eShop is gone, the Wii U eShop's gone, which the Wii U had some DS games.
Yeah.
It just Delta stands out as the way to play, I would say. So hats off to you, sir. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I really appreciate all that.
It's the best. I'm curious the benefits that you've noticed, if any, what they would be, of Apple Silicon specifically to Delta, as they've made this transition in their Macs. The iPads now have the same chips as Macs, and the phone obviously has been on Apple Silicon since, I want to say, the 4S something. Anyway, around that time. The phone's been a while, but the computer and the iPad and the Apple TV, what have you noticed in Delta?
So I would say there probably isn't that much direct anything I'm noticing yet, because I think the biggest immediate advantage to Apple Silicon and Delta would be like, oh, now I can put Delta on like the Mac. But I'm already planning to do like a dedicated like Mac Catalyst port. Okay. That's like to make a real experience, not just like an iPhone app on the Mac. And so then that would work on Intel Macs anyway. So that even is like, if I wanted to just put Delta immediately on a Mac, I could do that. But what does, I think, help Delta the most with this transition is that we've already started seeing emulators start to add support for Mac OS and the ARM-based Mac OS. Like, because now, because Melon, like the DS emulator I'm using, added support for like the M1 Macs, or like I said earlier, the Switch emulator, Rileey, however you say it, they added support for M1 Macs. And by adding support for that, it makes it much easier to then port to Delta or to iPhone. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, where just by nature of the fact that iPhone and Mac are now the same, whenever an emulator is ported to Mac, it'll be way easier to get to iPhone, which wasn't always the case before. Sometimes it was, but as we got to like the more complex systems like GameCube, it'd be very hard to port a full performance like Intel-based Dolphin to the ARM-based iPad and get all the performance you want. And so I think it's just more of going to the future. We're going to see a lot more emulators support all these platforms now because it's unified.
Yeah.
And so when they make it for Mac, just the iPad will get those benefits down the road.
Yeah. Well, what we need to see next is the 3DS emulator scene get on the Apple Silicon train, and maybe we can see Citra in Delta someday. That would be super sweet.
I definitely plan to add 3DS at some point, because I also I would love to add all Nintendo systems on an infinite timescale. But yeah, the 3DS one would be great for me to add whenever I have time to actually invest the effort into dedicating. That's honestly the hardest part about running altStore and Delta right now, is Delta's my passion. I love Delta. altStore takes a lot of my time because it's a platform other developers are using. And so I'm like, I have to make sure that other people are also able to use it. But yeah, I just want to be able to work on Delta, make these cool like little features.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I'm very excited about the future of Delta altStore. It seems like changes could be coming your way this year, directly from Apple.
It seems that way. And you know what? It's something I've been expecting since launching I've been expecting like this to eventually happen before I launch altStore, but it's really surreal to actually like now see it actually happening. Like, to be reading these news articles about Apple to allow alternative app stores. I'm like, okay, yep, I suspected that this is where things are going, but I guess it's finally here now. It's time to actually see what happens.
Time to prepare the way, as some may say.
Exactly. And so, I'm just going to be prepared for anything, but definitely going to be an exciting year, I'm pretty sure.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm looking forward to this year, not only for Apple, but for you as well, you and Shane over there at altStore and Delta. So thank you so much, Riley, for joining me on the show. Where can the people find altStore Delta? Just let the people know what's going on.
Yeah, you can find, right now we have a Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at altStore.io. But we will be moving to Mastodon very soon, because I am also on Twitter at Riley Testut, but I've stopped posting there too. So you can find me at Riley Testut at mastodon.social if you want to catch up with stuff there. And then, or just the normal website, altstore.io, is where you can get all the altStore information.
Awesome. There will be links to all of that in the show notes. Rest in peace, Twitter. Rest in peace, third-party clients.
R.I.P. Oh, I know. So sad. RIP Tweetbot and Twitter.
They had the best run. It's a shame. We were talking about that before the show.
I'm very sad.
Stark times. Anyway, you can find my writing over at maxfrequency.net. My other show, Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between games or movies exploring their evolution, design, and legacy. Season 5 is going on right now. Resident Evil, which was on the GameCube. I did yesterday in my testing of Delta, just to reinstall it and stuff. Loaded up Code Veronica X. It's like, there it is. There's a game right there.
Yeah. Excellent.
So you can check out that season. We've got other seasons you can check out as well. And then I'm on Twitter at MaxRoberts143. I just tweet when articles go up. So really just go to maxfrequency.net. That's all you really need to do. But thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, adios. I just installed. So my previous guest on the show was Javid Sterlet. I don't know if you've seen his Good Blood videos or the Hyrule Journal stuff.
No.
Anyway, he did like a Ocarina of Time essay about 4 years ago called Ocarina of Time, a masterclass in subtext. And that's when he kind of took off. Anyway, I talked with him, and part of my research was his videos have like widescreen Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I was like, how do you do that? That sent me down the rabbit hole of the new PC port of Ocarina of Time. They've reverse engineered it. And like installing that on my Mac is super hacky. It's wild. It doesn't even use the menu bar. So like to get into the settings of the game, I'll load it up. I'll send you a screenshot.
Yeah, sure.
It's hilarious. You have to hit like F1, which I don't remember the last time I had to hit F1 to get a menu.
Who uses the function? Yeah, the function row.
So so it's actually up. I'm gonna put it away. Does this tell you if you want to see the screen?
Oh yeah, okay, I can see.
It might be slow. So it's not telling me hit F1, but if I do hit F1, then the menu.
Oh yeah. Oh, see, this is what I'm talking about. It's like it works.
It works, and they've done some things. I'll give them credit. Yeah. So like, there's presets. Yeah. So if you want certain things, so like they do a lot for you. Yeah. But there's cheats, there's tools. You could load a randomizer.
I mean, it's awesome. Like they have all the stuff you want, but
exactly.
See, I'm just like a little snob. It's like, when I use software that looks like that, I almost like, don't use it. It's why I didn't jailbreak. That's the reason. I didn't like how hacky jailbreaking was. I was like, it feels so weird. Like it feels like unpolished. And so I'm just a snob for like app design. And so I appreciate it. It's really cool. But that's why I was like, for emulators, I'm like, we're really missing out on like the basic like things here. Like the game looks great, but it never feels like a native Mac app or anything.
Exactly.
Not to hate you. Like, I'm not hating. Again, they're doing way more impressive things than I. It's harder to make the emulator than to make the wrapper around it. So I can't fault them at all.
It's just it's the same thing though. But
yeah, but like the F1 define. It's like sure. But like those things to me are what prevent people from sticking to a product, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like it's cool to try off, but if I want long-term thing, I have to not have those tiny little hiccups all the time.
I agree with you. So,
Delta for Mac someday.
Yes,
someday
please.
Soon. It will happen. Yeah,
please.
It definitely will. It's just another thing. Like
Delta
I gotta have time for
Apple TV, so I can put GameCube games on the TV. I still remember that tweet you had.
I know. Yeah, I have it, and I need to get back to it because the problem is it's still really hacky to even get working, but.
Oh, I'm sure. I can't. I don't even know how to get apps onto the TV.
That was the hardest thing. Like, getting it to people out there would be hard, but man, it was fucking wild having like Mario Sunshine or Double Dash on the Apple TV because you just go to the game and you just play, and again you use like a Pro controller and you're like, okay, well this is perfect.
Yeah,
so
it's awesome.
It'll happen whether it's an official app or like you gotta compile it from GitHub. I'll make it happen somehow because it's too cool.
It is way too cool. And just think of the upscaling capabilities and just...
I know. It's like for my passion project for me. Like I really want that. And so I'll build it because I want my Apple TV to be able to do all this.
Good.
But Okay, we'll see. There's so much to Apple TV, Mac, iPad,
headset.
Everyone, I'm trying to build them all and also build altStore. So
Yeah. Oh,
trying to
yeah.
balance it,
It's awesome.
It's fun though.